What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
On May 25th, 2013, Bardstown, Kentucky, a picturesque town often voted America's most beautiful small town, was shattered by a brazen act of violence that remains unsolved to this day. Officer Jason Ellis, a 33-year-old K-9 officer, devoted father, and former minor league baseball player, was ambushed and executed in what investigators believe was a carefully planned attack. Nearly a decade later, despite an exhaustive investigation and one of Kentucky's largest ever reward offers, Ellis's killer still walks free. Jason Ellis was the epitome of a community pillar, a standout athlete who held baseball records at the University of the Cumberlands. He left a minor league career with the Cincinnati Reds organization to pursue law enforcement and start a family. He joined the Bardstown Police Department in 2006, quickly earning respect as a dedicated officer and mentor. Ellis balanced police work with coaching youth baseball and raising two sons, Hunter, born with Down syndrome, and Parker, his mini-me. His German Shepherd partner, Figo, was not just a K-9 companion, but a beloved family member. By all accounts, Ellis had no known enemies, only friends, admirers, and a community that relied on him. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on May 25th, Ellis finished his shift and headed home via his usual route, Bluegrass Parkway, exiting at exit 34, a secluded stretch near his house. As he slowed his cruiser, he spotted an unusual obstruction, a pile of tree branches blocking the road. Ellis, ever the conscientious officer, pulled over to clear the debris. It was a trap. A gunman, lying in wait on an elevated ridge, opened fire with a 12-gauge shotgun, striking Ellis multiple times with a mix of birdshot and buckshot. The fatal shot hit him in the head at close range. His body was discovered shortly after by a distillery worker and a passing motorist, but the killer had vanished into the night. From the outset, investigators faced baffling questions. Who would target Ellis? He had no known personal conflicts. How did the killer know his route? The ambush suggested surveillance. Was this a professional hit? The precision implied military or law enforcement training. Key suspects and leads included one. The Bardstown Money Gang, Ellis, had arrested members of the local rap group for drug offenses. Months after his murder, BMG members bragged at a party about killing a cop. Brant Shekels, the mayor's nephew and a known BMG affiliate, was arrested for assault in 2013 and allegedly boasted about Ellis's murder. Despite this, no charges were filed. 2. The Cornbread Mafia connection. In 2014, inmate Danny Early threatened a guard, saying, "You'll be pushing up daisies like Jason Ellis." Early referenced the Cornbread Mafia, a notorious Kentucky drug ring, but no concrete links were found. 3. Police corruption theories. Some speculated Ellis may have uncovered misconduct, but no evidence supports this. His fellow officers, including best friend Andrew Riley, were cleared. Hashtag obstacles in the case have come up as no murder weapon was ever recovered. No clear motive emerged, despite Ellis's narcotics work. The crime scene yielded little forensic evidence. Witnesses reported no suspicious vehicles or persons near exit 34 that night. The aftermath, a family in town and mourning Ellis's funeral, drew hundreds, including law enforcement from across Kentucky. His K-9 partner, Figo, placed a paw on his casket in a heartbreaking moment. The Ellis family, wife Amy and sons Hunter and Parker, were left grappling with an unimaginable loss. Amy Ellis eventually remarried, but has spoken openly about her enduring grief. Figo, Ellis's loyal K-9, passed away in 2017 and was buried beside him. The case remains open, with periodic reviews but no breakthroughs. A $200,000 reward remains unclaimed in the death of Jason Ellis. His name is etched on the National Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. Jason Ellis's murder was not just an attack on one man, it was an assault on the sense of safety in Bardstown. If you have any information, contact the Kentucky State Police at 1-800-222-5555. On the cold evening of February 9th, 2008, a quiet street off Dixie Highway in Louisville, Kentucky, became the starting point of a mystery that still lingers nearly 2 decades later. Patricia Hubard, a 46-year-old woman known for her deep faith and community involvement, seemingly vanished from her home in the 7300 block of Dunkirk Lane. Her disappearance stunned her family, disturbed her neighborhood, and eventually became linked to an even darker tragedy. Patricia, affectionately known as Tricia by her family and friends, was a compassionate woman rooted in the teachings of her faith. A regular churchgoer, she often volunteered in outreach programs and was well known for supporting those in need through local food drives and shelter initiatives. She was not just a mother and a wife. She was the spiritual and emotional pillar of her community. Her son would later describe her as someone who never met a stranger and who could light up a room with a smile and a prayer. But behind the image of warmth and grace, there were signs of pain, quiet struggles hidden from the outside world. Patricia's marriage to Bradley Hubbard Jr. was marred by a documented history of domestic violence, control, and legal interventions. Public records reveal that Patricia had filed for emergency protection orders against Bradley multiple times over the years, specifically in 2000, 2004, and 2006. Each time, the protection orders were tied to alarming allegations of abuse, including verbal threats, physical violence, and controlling behavior. In one instance, Bradley was reportedly charged with terroristic threatening after allegedly telling Patricia he would kill her. Yet, like many victims of long-term domestic abuse, Patricia also attempted reconciliation at various points, driven by hope, fear, or perhaps religious convictions about marriage and forgiveness. In 2007, not long before Patricia vanished, another woman, unrelated to Patricia, sought a protective order against Bradley. This suggested that his violent tendencies may have extended beyond his marriage. Still, by early 2008, Patricia and Bradley appear to be on the mend. Family members say Patricia seemed cautiously optimistic about their relationship. There were no active protective orders in place at the time of her disappearance, and the couple was reportedly living together peacefully, or so it seemed. February 9th, 2008 began as a normal Saturday. Patricia was at home with Bradley on Dunkirk Lane. According to Bradley's later account to police, he left the house for a short time that evening, sometime between 6 o'clock and 8 p.m. When he returned, Patricia was gone. No car missing. No signs of a break-in or struggle. No calls from her. Nothing left behind to suggest where she might have gone or why. Bradley claimed he assumed Patricia had gone out for a walk or to run errands, although friends would later say that was highly uncharacteristic. Patricia was known for her caution and routine. She would never leave the house without letting someone know, especially at night. When Patricia didn't come home that night and still hadn't contacted anyone by morning, her family grew increasingly worried. They reported her missing on February 10th, 2008. Police were called to investigate, and they quickly focused on the Hubard home. Detectives found no signs of forced entry or any visible indications of foul play. There were no overturned items, no blood, no broken glass, nothing to point to an abduction or violent altercation. Still, Patricia's sudden disappearance triggered immediate suspicion, especially given her volatile history with her husband. Bradley Hubard, as the last known person to see Patricia, was naturally questioned. Though he gave his statement and cooperated to some extent, authorities never officially named him a suspect. His alibi, that he had briefly left and returned to find Patricia gone, remained unverified. And with no physical evidence or witnesses placing Patricia anywhere after that night, investigators found themselves hitting a dead end quickly. There was no activity on Patricia's bank cards, no social media posts, and no cell phone signals to track. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the cold February air. One of the reasons Patricia's family was quick to sound the alarm is because she was not the kind of woman to leave without telling someone. She was a creature of habit, deeply responsible and grounded in her commitments. She wouldn't just up and go, her son later told reporters. She had work. She had church. She had people who depended on her. If she was going somewhere, even just to Kroger, she'd tell someone. That was just how she was. She was also meticulous about her appearance and surroundings. Her makeup, purse, phone, everything she normally took with her was still at the house. Her car was parked out front. The lights were off. It was as if she had vanished mid-thought. For family and investigators alike, this behavior was not only uncharacteristic, it was chilling. Then, just 3 months after Patricia went missing, the case took a grim and tragic turn. In May 2008, Bradley Hubard was found dead in a grassy field in the 4400 block of Lee's Lane, not far from the Ohio River. He was just 44 years old. An autopsy ruled his death overdose. No note was left behind. Though some speculated it might be connected to guilt or knowledge about Patricia's fate, investigators couldn't definitively link the two events. Still, the optics were troubling. An abusive husband, the last person to see his wife alive, who dies just weeks later in the same general area. Police reviewed Bradley's vehicle and residence again, but no new clues emerged. If he had any answers, they died with him. Patricia's son has continued to push for justice, making appearances on local news, engaging with cold case investigators, and urging the community to remember his mother not as a statistic, but as a person, a woman of faith, a victim of domestic violence, and someone who deserved far better. He believes that domestic violence should not be a quiet family matter. It should be confronted, discussed, and prevented. I don't want her to be forgotten, he said in a 2016 interview. We may not have closure. We may never know everything. But I want her story told because someone out there needs to hear it. Anyone with information about Patricia Hubard's disappearance is encouraged to contact the Louisville Metro Police Department or submit an anonymous tip through Crime Stoppers. On the evening of July 4th, 1984, just 3 days before her 23rd birthday, Elizabeth Maghard was last heard from while speaking on the phone with her mother. Living at the 500 block of River Road in Silver Grove, Kentucky, Elizabeth had just been reunited with her young son, who was brought to her apartment by her ex-husband. During the call, she mentioned that her ex-husband had arrived with their child and that she would call her mother back after he left. However, that call never came, and Elizabeth Maghard was never heard from again. Her disappearance marked the beginning of a mystery that would last for decades, with her family, friends, and authorities desperately trying to piece together what happened. To this day, her case remains unsolved, and the circumstances surrounding her vanishing remain a chilling puzzle. Elizabeth Maghard's life in the months leading up to her disappearance had been tumultuous. She was in the midst of a difficult divorce from her ex-husband, with whom she had a young son. The couple had a contentious relationship, and they were locked in a custody battle over their child. The stress from the divorce and the ongoing disputes likely played a role in the events that transpired on the evening of July 4th. On that fateful night, Elizabeth was speaking with her mother on the phone when she mentioned her ex-husband arriving at her apartment with their son. There was nothing unusual about this interaction, at least not at first. Elizabeth had custody of their child, but her ex-husband, who had been visiting, was known to have a difficult relationship with her. Still, Elizabeth assured her mother that she would call back after he left. Elizabeth's mother, assuming the conversation was just a routine exchange, did not think much of it at the time. Unfortunately, that would be the last time she would hear from her daughter. The next day, Elizabeth's babysitter called her mother in a panic, informing her that Elizabeth had failed to drop off their son as scheduled. This was unusual and raised immediate alarm. Elizabeth was a responsible mother, and she had never missed a scheduled drop-off before. Her mother, concerned for her daughter's safety, immediately went to Elizabeth's apartment to check on her. Upon arrival, Elizabeth's apartment appeared to have been abandoned in a hurry. There were no signs of a struggle, but Elizabeth's personal belongings were still inside. Her purse was on the table, an uncashed check was left behind, and her pet cat was still at the apartment. The cat's presence was particularly concerning, as Elizabeth was a devoted pet owner and would not have simply left her behind without a second thought. Despite the fact that everything in the apartment appeared undisturbed, Elizabeth was nowhere to be found. Her car was parked outside, and there were no signs of forced entry or any indication of what might have happened. It was as though she had simply vanished from her apartment without a trace. In addition to the troubling disappearance of Elizabeth, her young son was also nowhere to be found. It was only later that her ex-husband was discovered to be in possession of the child. The ex-husband, who had been living in Cold Spring, Kentucky, had taken the child with him. There is no explanation for why he had taken their son, nor had he informed Elizabeth of his plans to do so. While Elizabeth's son was returned safely to his father, the circumstances of his disappearance raised further suspicion. Elizabeth's mother was immediately concerned about her daughter's safety and well-being, and she questioned whether her ex-husband had any role in the disappearance. The fact that Elizabeth's son was taken without her knowledge or consent only heightened the suspicion that something sinister had occurred. In the days following Elizabeth's disappearance, her family became increasingly concerned. Her mother worked with law enforcement to search for any clues that might explain what had happened. Despite extensive efforts to locate Elizabeth, no leads emerged. The only clue authorities had was the phone conversation Elizabeth had with her mother, during which she mentioned her ex-husband's visit with her son. That was the last trace anyone had of her. The investigation into Elizabeth's disappearance initially focused on her ex-husband, who had become a prime suspect. Their divorce had been a bitter one, and their custody battle was still unresolved at the time of her disappearance. Elizabeth's family believed that her ex-husband may have had a motive to harm her or take their son away from her. Additionally, his actions after Elizabeth's disappearance, taking their son and relocating to Indiana, fueled suspicions that he was involved in her vanishing. Despite these suspicions, law enforcement was unable to gather enough evidence to charge Elizabeth's ex-husband with any crime. He denied any involvement in her disappearance and maintained that Elizabeth had simply left on her own accord. However, his actions, particularly taking their son and not notifying Elizabeth's family about his plans, were seen as highly suspicious by those close to her. Given the lack of any concrete evidence or clear explanation for Elizabeth's disappearance, foul play has long been suspected in the case. Elizabeth's mother and other family members believe that she did not leave voluntarily and that someone else was involved in her disappearance. The fact that she left behind all of her belongings, including her purse and an uncashed check, suggests that she did not intend to leave her life behind. Her ex-husband, though never charged in the case, remains the primary suspect in Elizabeth's disappearance. His behavior in the days following her vanishing, including his decision to take their son and move to Indiana, has led many to believe that he may have been responsible for her disappearance or at least had knowledge of what happened to her. As of today, Elizabeth Maghard's case remains unsolved. Bardstown, Kentucky, is a quiet town with a population of just over 13,000. However, Between 2013 and 2015, it became the site of a series of violent crimes that rattled the community. The town, known for its bourbon distilleries and rich history, became infamous for these tragedies. In May 2013, Bardstown police officer Jason Ellis was ambushed and killed while removing debris from a road. The following year, in April 2014, Kathy Netherland and her 16-year-old daughter Samantha were brutally murdered in their home. By 2015, Bardstown residents were desperate for peace and normalcy, hoping that the worst was behind them. But on July 3, 2015, tragedy struck once again. This time, the disappearance of 35-year-old Crystal Rogers shattered the town's illusion of safety. Her case remains unsolved, despite mounting suspicion on her boyfriend, Brooks Houck, and his brother, Nick Houck, a former Bardstown police officer. Crystal Rogers was a mother of 5, described by family and friends as kind, compassionate, and shy. She had separated from her husband, Keith Rogers, and later began a relationship with Brooks Houck, a local real estate manager. The couple had one child together, a son named Eli. Although Crystal and Brooks had been together for several years, their relationship had become strained in 2015. Crystal's family noted that she had been unhappy, and some sources claimed she was planning to leave him, though that was never officially confirmed. Crystal had 5 children in total, and her family described her as devoted to her children. Crystal's disappearance would turn out to be just one of many tragedies for her family. The disappearance. What happened on July 3rd to 5th, 2015? Last known movements on the evening of July 3rd, 2015, Crystal texted a friend to say she was looking forward to spending a child-free night with Brooks. According to Brooks, they spent the evening together at his family farm in Bardstown, Kentucky. He claimed that they were both awake late into the night, with Crystal using her phone. Brooks later stated that he went to bed at 11 p.m. and Crystal was still awake at that time. He claimed he wasn't initially concerned about her disappearance because they had a stressed relationship and that it wasn't uncommon for her to leave and stay with her cousin. However, by the next day, when Brooks couldn't reach Crystal and she failed to contact her family, concern began to grow. 2 days later, on July 5th, Crystal's maroon Chevrolet Impala was discovered abandoned on the Bluegrass Parkway in Hardin County, Kentucky, near mile marker 14, close to Elizabethtown. The vehicle had a flat tire, and the doors were unlocked. Inside the car, Crystal's keys, phone, purse, and other personal items were found, but there was no sign of her. What stood out the most to investigators was the fact that the phone's battery was dead. This indicated that it had been turned off or stopped working recently, possibly around the time she disappeared. Her family also noted that it was unusual for her to be in that area, as she rarely traveled there. Brooks later claimed he was not concerned because he assumed Crystal had left to party, but her family found this explanation uncharacteristic of her behavior. They pointed out that Crystal would never abandon her children or leave without telling anyone. Brooks Houck's behavior following Crystal's disappearance raised red flags for both family and investigators. When questioned by police, Brooks initially claimed that he went to bed at 11 p.m. on the night of July 3rd, and that Crystal was still awake at that time. However, security footage from the family farm contradicted his story, showing that Brooks left the farm around midnight, while after he said he'd gone to bed. Brooks's explanation that Crystal had simply left to party and that she had left in a huff was seen as an attempt to downplay the situation. When police asked him to help search for Crystal, he declined and seemed apathetic, which was another point of concern. At the time of Crystal's disappearance, Brooks's brother, Nick Houck, was a police officer with the Bardstown Police Department. However, Nick's actions soon became a major point of investigation. On July 8th, during an interview with police, Brooks received a phone call from Nick, which caused him to suddenly stop cooperating with law enforcement. Investigators believe that this phone call led to Brooks becoming evasive and less willing to assist with the investigation. Further suspicion grew when investigators discovered that Nick and Brooks had met later that night at the Houck family farm, where they reportedly spent 2 hours together. Neither of them could clearly explain what they did during that time, raising more questions. Nick's refusal to cooperate became even more evident when he was asked to take a polygraph test. He failed the test, with the results suggesting that he was being deceptive about what he knew regarding Crystal's disappearance. By October 2015, Nick was fired from the Bardstown Police Department for obstructing the investigation into his brother's girlfriend's disappearance. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came when investigators searched Nick's police cruiser. Blood traces were discovered on a blanket and in the trunk, though it was unclear whose blood it was. This finding cast further doubt on the Houck brothers' innocence and suggested that they may have played a role in Crystal's disappearance. After Crystal vanished, Brooks and Nick were involved in selling their grandmother's white Buick, which drew suspicion from investigators. There were reports that the vehicle may have been used to transport evidence related to Crystal's disappearance, though nothing definitive has been proven. Nick's grandmother, Anna Whitesides, also invoked the Fifth Amendment when subpoenaed to testify about the Buick, further fueling suspicions that the family was hiding something. In the months following Crystal's disappearance, the investigation continued to unfold with a series of legal and criminal developments. Brooks's longtime friend and employee, Danielle Singleton, was indicted for perjury in December 2015. Singleton had provided false testimony to a grand jury investigating Crystal's case. He had claimed that Brooks had murdered Crystal, but he later recanted his statements. Although Singleton was charged with 38 counts of perjury, he was ultimately given a reduced sentence after pleading guilty to lesser charges. The investigation into Crystal Rogers' disappearance continues to unfold, with new developments that keep this case in the public eye, though much remains unresolved. The persistent suspicions surrounding Brooks Houck and his brother Nick Houck, along with the failure of the investigation to bring concrete results, have left the community of Bardstown in a state of uneasy anticipation. As of 2023, the FBI has taken the reins in the case, offering a glimmer of hope that new attention and resources might finally crack the case wide open. From the outset, the disappearance of Crystal Rogers seemed riddled with contradictions, conflicting testimonies, and a frustrating lack of cooperation from key individuals, particularly those closest to her. Brooks Houck, her boyfriend and the last person to see her alive, was widely regarded as the central figure in the investigation. His strange behavior, his failure to engage with the search efforts, his inconsistent statements, and the lack of emotion exhibited over his girlfriend's sudden disappearance raised suspicion almost immediately. However, despite these red flags, law enforcement found themselves trapped in a cycle of incomplete information and familial connections that obstructed their progress. In particular, the involvement of Nick Houck, a police officer with the Bardstown Police Department at the time, proved to be an especially frustrating roadblock. Nick's refusal to cooperate, his subsequent firing, and the discovery of bloodstains on his police vehicle made him a prime person of interest in the investigation. However, the case was tangled in legal maneuvers and lack of definitive evidence, which stymied any early breakthroughs. As the investigation deepened, several individuals were implicated in giving false statements or otherwise hindering the inquiry, further complicating the search for the truth. In December 2015, Danny Singleton, an employee of Brooks Houck and a longtime friend of the family, was indicted on charges of perjury. Singleton had allegedly lied to a grand jury investigating Rogers' disappearance, and though he ultimately pled guilty to lesser charges, he did not provide significant new information to move the case forward. In 2016, two men, Vincent Dakota Nethery and Donald Lee Howard Jr., were arrested for making false reports to the police, claiming that Singleton had murdered Rogers. Their charges were later dismissed, but their involvement raised more questions about the credibility of statements surrounding the case. Despite all these missteps, it was clear that the Houck brothers' refusal to cooperate with investigators, coupled with the strange and suspicious circumstances surrounding Crystal's disappearance, kept the case at the forefront of the public's mind. Brooks's actions, including attempts to block interviews and his failure to explain his behavior adequately, further cemented his status as the primary suspect in the case. Brooks Houck's role in Crystal Rogers' disappearance remains the focus of the investigation. His relationship with Crystal had been strained, with family members suggesting that she was on the brink of leaving him. Many believe this potential breakup could have been a significant motive for Brooks to take drastic action. His initial lack of concern after Crystal went missing, followed by the rapidly changing timelines, made his statements increasingly difficult to believe. Brooks's refusal to participate in the search for Crystal and his insistence on the story that she simply left to party was at odds with those who knew her, who insisted such behavior was out of character. Furthermore, his decision to lie about certain details regarding the evening of her disappearance only deepened suspicion. In October 2015, Brooks was officially named the prime suspect in the case. Although no formal charges were filed against him, he maintained his innocence, but the growing body of circumstantial evidence, including his bizarre behavior and the testimonies of those around him, only further suggested his involvement. As of now, Brooks remains the focus of the investigation, but new developments continue to shape the case. Nick Houck, a former officer with the Bardstown Police Department, is another pivotal figure in the mystery. The investigation into his involvement has been clouded by his position within the law enforcement community, his apparent interference in the investigation, and his lack of cooperation with authorities. Nick's involvement in the case came under intense scrutiny after he failed a polygraph test and was fired for the Bardstown Police Department in October 2015 for obstructing the investigation. Despite being a former officer, Nick's actions raised suspicions about his knowledge of the investigation and whether he had assisted Brooks in covering up what happened to Crystal. Most notably, Nick's police vehicle became a focal point in the investigation after traces of blood were found in the trunk. Though it was never definitively linked to Crystal, the blood stains raised questions about Nick's role in hiding evidence. His refusal to cooperate with investigators, along with the odd behavior of both brothers in the aftermath of Crystal's disappearance, has kept the speculation surrounding their involvement alive. The most frustrating aspect of the Crystal Rogers case has been the interference from those closest to her. The close relationship between Brooks and Nick Houck, combined with their refusal to cooperate with law enforcement, has complicated the investigation in ways that would be difficult for most cases. Evidence points to foul play, yet the family's involvement in obstructing the investigation, along with the lack of concrete physical evidence, has made it challenging for authorities to move forward decisively. In a particularly tragic twist, Crystal's father, Tommy Ballard, was shot and killed in 2016 while searching for his daughter. The shooting of Tommy remains unsolved and has added another layer of mystery and heartache to the case. Some speculate that the murder of Tommy was connected to his efforts to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance, though no arrests have been made in connection with his death. In 2023, the FBI took control of the case, reigniting hope that new resources and a fresh perspective could lead to a breakthrough. The investigation has involved new searches and the examination of additional leads, including the possible involvement of other individuals who may have had knowledge of what happened to Crystal. The focus on the Houck brothers remains, but the FBI's involvement has brought renewed attention to the case and a push for a resolution. Despite the lack of a body and the continuing challenges in obtaining irrefutable evidence, authorities remain confident that the truth is out there, and they're not backing down in their pursuit of justice for Crystal Rogers and her family. Over the years, several theories have emerged, although none have been proven. Some believe that Crystal was murdered by Brooks Houck, possibly in a fit of rage related to their strained relationship. Others suggest that Nick Houck may have been involved in helping Brooks cover up the crime, using his position as a police officer to hide evidence and obstruct the investigation. There have also been rumors of possible connections to other unsolved cases in Bardstown, but so far, no solid evidence has been presented to suggest that Crystal's case is linked to the deaths of Officer Jason Ellis or Kathy and Samantha Netherland. Another theory involves the possibility of Crystal's body being hidden in a remote location, although no traces of her body have been found despite extensive searches. Human trafficking has also been speculated, but no concrete evidence has emerged to support this theory either. The disappearance of Crystal Rogers remains one of Kentucky's most perplexing unsolved cases. While there have been many leads, twists, and turns, the truth remains elusive. The involvement of the Houck brothers, the questionable actions of law enforcement, and the continuing search for Crystal's body have made this case particularly haunting for the community of Bardstown. As of 2025, the FBI's renewed interest in the case provides a sense of hope that the investigation may finally reach a conclusion. However, until that happens, Crystal Rogers' family and friends continue to live with the painful uncertainty of what happened to her. The truth is out there, and justice for Crystal remains a long-awaited goal. If you have any information regarding Crystal Rogers' disappearance, please contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. In the military town of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home to the 101st Airborne Division and a revolving door of military families, disappearances aren't often headline news. Lives are constantly in motion. Families transfer in, get deployed, or move on. But sometime in 1974 and 1975, a young woman named Alice Fay Jefferson simply vanished, and for nearly 4 decades, no one outside her family even knew she was missing. There was no manhunt, no news coverage, no police press conference, just silence. Alice Fay Jefferson was a mother of 2 young children, a daughter and a son, aged 5 and 6 at the time she vanished. The family was stationed at Fort Campbell, where her husband, Lee Andrew Jefferson, served as a soldier. Lee was not the biological father of Alice's children. They had come into the marriage with her, and although Lee was now their guardian, he seemed to view them more as a responsibility than a blessing. To outsiders, Alice may have seemed like many other military wives, resilient, resourceful, and accustomed to life on base. But behind closed doors, the Jefferson household was tense. While little is known about Alice's personal relationships, her children would later recall a subtle but growing hostility in the home. Their mother never mentioned plans to leave. She was attentive, gentle, and deeply protective of them. She had no known history of mental illness, no money withdrawn, no golonbis. When she vanished, she left behind not only her children and possessions, but also every sign that she'd intended to return. The most haunting details come not from official records, because there were none for decades, but from the memories of Alice's children. Now grown, their recollections form the core of what we know. One day, after school, the 2 children stood waiting. Their mother wasn't there. There were no friends offering them a ride home, no teachers escorting them to the office. So the children walked. However far that walk was, it must have felt endless. When they arrived at home, they knocked and knocked. Minutes turned to what felt like hours. When Lee finally opened the door, he looked disheveled, drenched in sweat, and visibly agitated. He told the children he had been asleep and barked at them not to go into the bedroom. Their mother, Alice, was nowhere to be found. That night, instead of sleeping in their own beds or even asking about their mother's whereabouts, Lee made the children sleep in his room. A strange, unexplained act that only added to their confusion and fear. The children were not allowed to search the home. There was no call to their grandparents, no effort to track Alice's friends. She was simply gone. A few days later, Lee packed the kids into a car and drove them to Arkansas, where Alice's parents lived. He dropped them off and never came back. What makes Alice's case both chilling and tragic is the sheer length of time it took for any authority to even acknowledge that she was missing. Alice's parents reportedly tried to file a missing person report back in the 1970s, but were told by military officials or law enforcement that the case couldn't be opened because she was an adult and had the right to leave. Lee, for his part, claimed he had contacted someone, though no records support that. According to him, Alice left him. She walked out one day and chose never to come back. No one from the military investigated. No police visited the house. Her car and clothes remained untouched, but those details weren't logged officially because there was no case. Alice Jefferson disappeared not only from her home, but from the system. It wasn't until 2013, nearly 40 years later, that a formal missing person report was finally filed, after her adult children, long haunted by her disappearance, pushed authorities to take the case seriously. By that point, nearly everyone involved had moved on. Witnesses were scattered. Lee Jefferson remained free and living his life, never facing charges in connection to her vanishing. What kind of man was Lee Jefferson? Military records place him at Fort Campbell between March 1973 and July 1975, a window that aligns with Alice's disappearance. Neighbors and relatives later described him as controlling. There are no publicly known criminal records connected to Lee, but there are serious questions about how he handled Alice's disappearance. For one, he never returned for the children. He left them with Alice's parents and never made an effort to reclaim custody. No legal battle, no fatherly concern. For decades, he offered the same vague story, that Alice had simply abandoned them all. Yet her children recall no suitcases missing, no arguments in the days leading up to her disappearance. They remember the door being locked, their stepfather sweating, angry, evasive. And most of all, they remember never being allowed into the bedroom again. One has to ask, was he hiding? So what happened to Alice Fay Jefferson? There are theories, of course. The simplest is that Lee killed her in a fit of rage, perhaps over control, jealousy, or fear of abandonment. That would explain the children being locked out, his behavior, and the abrupt delivery of the children to Arkansas. If that theory is true, then where's her body? Military housing in the 1970s didn't always have detailed property records or close oversight. It's possible he buried her nearby or disposed of her remains off base. No search was ever conducted, so the opportunity for concealment was wide open. Another theory, however unlikely, is that Alice did leave, but met foul play elsewhere. But if she truly walked out, where did she go? Why no contact with her beloved children? Why leave behind her car, her clothes, her identity? Alice's children, now adults, have long since ruled that out. In every memory, in every whisper of intuition, they know their mother never would have left them. By 2013, public attention to cold cases had risen. The national push for solving old disappearances led to databases like NAMUS and renewed law enforcement efforts. With Alice's case finally entered into the system, authorities now had the means to look for unidentified remains that could match her. Still, no match has ever been made. Her DNA and dental records have likely been submitted. Flyers have gone out. Interviews have been conducted with remaining family members. But time is a brutal enemy in cold cases. Vittnessysteem. Records get lost, and people like Lee Jefferson can pass away never having answered for what happened. As of the latest updates, no one has been charged. No evidence has surfaced, and Alice remains one of the hundreds of missing women from the 1970s who vanished in silence. The disappearance of Alice Fay Jefferson may never be solved, unless someone steps forward with long-held knowledge or remains are discovered that can finally be linked to her. Until then, her children continue to speak her name and ask the questions no one asked in 1975. Where is Alice Fay Jefferson? And who will speak for her?